What's up, chess fans? Welcome back. This will be the sixth and final round recap of the Westchester County Chess Championship. Before we get into the game, a little bit of backstory and context. So I'll be entering this round with a score of 5 out of 5, which is clear first. My opponent is entering the round with a score of 4.5 out of 5, which is clear second. So in order for him to win, he would have to win our game, whereas I would only need to draw. Now, when I looked at our past pairings, turned out that we both had exactly 3 whites and 2 blacks. One of the other players mentioned to me that because I had more points, I would have precedence and I would therefore get white. So a few days before the game, I started to prepare as white. Because I only needed to draw, I looked for different openings that had a relatively stodgy and drawish reputation. There's several openings to choose from. And I prepared. Now, a day before the game, the pairings came out, and I found out that I would, in fact, be black. So I had to start my prep over. Now, fortunately for me, my opponent was a relatively prolific player. He had lots of games online. As he needed to win, I expected him to play aggressively and typically play some kind of gambit. From the games I saw online, the most common gambit that he played is the King's Gambit. So I decided to prepare against that and prepare a line. So he did, in fact, play the King's Gambit. I played d5 and c6. So this is what's called the Nimzovich-Marshall counter gambit. It's a counter gambit because black is actually giving up one of his pawns. Now, Aaron Nimzovich was a very well-known, respected European player in the 1920s. It was said that he was actually strong enough to become or to contest for the World Championship. However, back in the 1920s, it didn't come down to who the best players were. It just came down to who had enough money to challenge the current champion, who was Capablanca. So unfortunately, Nimzovich didn't have the funds to play. That honor went to Alexander Alekhine, who came up with the money and promptly defeated Capablanca. I did see in the database, this is the most common move. However, my opponent likes to play a sideline Queen E2. There are some other possible moves as well. You can certainly play Knight F3. You can accept the gambit and so forth. But I saw that he likes to play Queen E2. Whereupon I took it. Now, if you've never seen this position before, the most natural recapture looks to be Queen E5, which I also saw in the database my opponent typically does play. And it's not so obvious why this is a mistake. I'm not going to go over all the different lines, but I will show just one trap. After Bishop E7, if white captures the pawn on G7, black can play Bishop F6. There's actually only one square for the queen to go to that's safe, whereupon the queen can be pinned. So that's just one possible sideline, although there's a large number of different variations. However, my opponent played the correct move, which is to take it with the pawn. So we played another couple moves of theory. Of course, now I'm threatening, after pinning the knight, I'm threatening knight d4. So he put a stop to that with c3. And I played Queen c7 with the notion that if he plays the very natural looking d4 to solidify his center, I'm going to take the pawn and take on c1. So this would have actually been a very interesting try for him. The position is very imbalanced, although I think it's actually much easier to play white. I think white can play king f2 and then look for moves like g3, bishop g2. And black will have to waste a lot of time running his queen around to get out of check. So let's go back. He didn't do that. So he played knight a3. The idea being that now this idea of d4 would work because the bishop is now defended by the rook. He's also threatening moves like knight b5. So I thought the best thing to do was simply just to take it and double his pawns. And I also get a tempo and castle. So now again, if he plays d4, my intention was to take it again and then come down queen c3, forking the king and the rook. So again, this would have been a very interesting try, despite the fact that white is down in exchange. I think I'd still rather be white here. White, of course, can just develop. He can castle, and black is going to have to waste a lot of time getting his queen out of danger. So I think this would have been an interesting try to create an imbalance in the position. He didn't try that. So he played bishop e2, which the engine doesn't like. Essentially, he's getting ready to castle queenside, and now he's finally threatening. He's once again threatening d4. Of course, now this trick doesn't work because the c3 square is protected. So I've already given up the bishop pair. Black also has a lead in development, and I'm down a pawn. So it's very important that I play actively. And don't give him time to just develop. If we just simply move our pieces around and make normal developing moves, for example, knight e7 to g6, bring my rooks, by that time he'll be able to consolidate and get his bishops rolling. And certainly the bishop pair should be superior. So I played f6, which the engine likes. And now he plays h3. It didn't make a lot of sense to retreat my bishop. If I do so, he can also gain time and get his bishop out. So I took his knight. He took back with the pawn, which is a bit surprising. The engine does prefer to take with the queen. Now, one thing I don't want to do here is to take the e-pawn with my queen. If we simply trade queens, then my initiative will somewhat dissipate, and the two bishops will become very effective. So it's important not to do that. The engine slightly prefers taking with the pawn, making room for the knight to go to f6, but I did take with the knight with the notion that my knight is now prepared to go to the c4 outpost. Played d3 to stop that. The downside, of course, is that now he's, somewhat hemming in his own bishop. The engine doesn't like it. Okay, so now I have to think about my last minor piece, my knight. Do I want to develop it to knight h6 or knight e7? Now both of them have some merit. Knight e7 has the benefit that now the knight has a little more scope. It can go to 3 different squares from here. Whereas if I put it on h6, it's really only headed for the f5 square. At the same time, I didn't want to block the e file. I wanted to put one of my rooks on the e file and attack the king and queen that are lined up. So I felt it was better to move it to h6. The engine slightly does prefer e7, and he castled. I got my rook to the open e file, queen f2. So he's now bearing down on the a7 square. I defended it with my king, also making room with the c8 square for possibly one of my rooks at a later time. And now the engine seems to think his best try is to push d4. Of course, I can hop into the outpost. However, this is now creating some room for his bishop to at least develop and connect his rooks. So that's what the engine prefers. He ended up playing f4, which was a mistake because it simply gives me a target. Knight g6. So I'm now attacking the f4 pawn twice. Rook g1. So now I didn't actually like taking the pawn either way. If I take with the queen, he will trade and come down to g7, so that's no good. And if I take with the knight, I think I was expecting him to sacrifice the exchange for a pawn. However, he gets quite a bit of counterplay. For example, the pawn is going to c4, where he's bearing down on my f6 pawn. So I didn't like that either. So I decided the best thing to do was just be to shore up my second rank. Rook e7, just defend the pawn. And now I'm threatening to take the f4 pawn. He played f5. So given the fact I am winning the pawn, I felt it's now time to trade queens. He traded that. Rook g3. I won my pawn, and strong move, g5, just to protect both knights. And now, honestly, thought I had pretty strong winning chances. His bishop is still sitting on f1. It's somewhat hemmed in. It's dominated by the knight. Cannot go to these squares. His pawn's blocking it. I now had ideas of pushing d4 and possibly doubling on the e file using the e3 square. King d2. And I still felt that his best try was to play d4. So rather than let him do that, I played my own d4. The engine doesn't like this move. It thinks I have better. But I'm also bearing down on the e3 square, ready to put one of my rooks there. Rook e1 and rook e3. The idea being that if he does not trade, and let's say moves his rook back somewhere, he's going to have a lot of trouble. I guess I could play here, and he'll have a lot of trouble, maintaining his h pawn. So he did in fact take the rook, whereupon I take back with the pawn, and now this pawn is actually looking pretty dangerous. I guess he cannot play. He cannot play rook d1 because that will lose his d pawn. So he played rook c2, protecting his d pawn. Knight g3. So now I'm actually threatening to win his piece with e2. Bishop c1. Of course, now I cannot play e2. Because he will take the one of the knights with check, and then the pawn. So I took off his bishop. Now here, actually, the engine would prefer me to play knight g2. So this is this could run into a lot of complications. I think I was thinking about him playing rook g1, e2, bishop, and the engine now wants me to play rook h4. So anyway, this can get somewhat complex. I decided not to go for all this with these kind of complications. And I just simply played e2. Only move, rook e1, rook e8, and his only move, rook d2. So now his king is somewhat stuck. It's blocking the scope of his own bishop. And I decided I can just simply leave everything as is and just try to make a queen on the g file. Played c4. I think there's a few ways for me to win, but I thought the simplest would be just simply to attack the d3 square, rook d8, king c2, and now we finally traded everything. And a good rule of thumb at this point is that when you're coming down to the ending, it's generally better to go after his pawns versus trying to protect your own pawns and try to make a queen, which is what I did. Rook d3, forking his pawns. Rook f2. And now with two connected passed pawns on the king's side, it's a relatively routine, should be a relatively routine win. And I'll just go through the last few moves pretty quickly. I got my rook out, so if I need to, I can check the white king. I don't want to hem behind my pawns. Of course, I don't want to blunder at this point and play h2, otherwise I'll get mated. So I didn't do that. I played rook d2, forcing his king back, and he played on a couple more moves. And he resigned at this point because there's no way for me to stop, for him to stop me from queening at least one of my pawns. Okay, so I did win the final game and the tournament with a score of 6-0. So just a couple of final thoughts on the tournament. So this was actually the only game that I did significant preparation for the opening. I think it's one of the weaker parts of my game, the opening, and if I expect to become a stronger player and a master someday, I'm definitely going to have to work on opening preparation. This is something you get from playing poker, but you don't always want to bet with your strong hands, fold with your weak hands, and think when there's difficult decisions, and play quickly when there's not. You want to become and have a reputation of being unpredictable. And also not just have one opening that you play and have just a expanded opening repertoire and be able to play different things. So if I can work on my opening, I think I can become a much stronger player. I thought almost exclusively time management was pretty good throughout the tournament. And that sometimes it's better to make decent moves quickly than optimal moves slowly. And try to manage the clock, especially when you have an hour to make all of your moves. Finally, I just want to shout out the tournament organizers. I think they did an excellent job. Also, the players, I thought, had excellent sportsmanship. All of my opponents were very gracious. We actually have a tournament. The tournament actually has a large number of kids in it, and I thought the adults set an excellent example of good sportsmanship for the kids. So I'm not exactly sure when the next tournament will be. I typically only play in 1 or 2 chess tournaments a year, so maybe a while before I get to more chess videos. I do actually play poker and backgammon tournaments more frequently, so I may try to make some content in those areas instead. But otherwise, if you enjoyed the video recaps, leave a like. Well, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.